we are total 26 now, and I think it's okay to start. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Warm welcome to this webinar, a very interactive webinar we are expecting today on civil society organizations responding to COVID-19, a critical role and how to support it. Before providing this floor to the speaker, I would like to quickly brief on the program schedule and also a ground rules. Our program will be start with introduction by Ms. Nisha Shrestha, which will be followed by Dr. Terry Gibson with his brief presentation. And Dr. Terry will also moderate a short sharing session where invited speakers will be sharing their comments and country perspectives. And at the end, Dr. Manu Gupta will summarize the program with conclusion and next steps.
Okay, namaste, good afternoon, good morning, and good evening as well to all the participants, prominent figures, experts, and DRR. So I, Nisha Shrestha, MEL manager from NSET, first of all, on behalf of the organizers, would like to welcome you all to this interactive webinar on the civil society organizations responding to COVID-19, a critical role and how to support it. It's hosted by Terry Gibson and Asian Disaster Reduction and Response Network, ADRRN. So as Rita ji already mentioned, we are all together here, 27 participants at the moment, but we'll be expecting some more participants soon. So we'll also welcome them. So today we are here together to discuss on this very important and very pertinent topic on the role of CSOs and COVID. The important question here is, what comes after COVID-19? Taking on the emergency powers during the health emergency can allow governments to inhibit liberty and rights, and in some cases to roll back social and environmental protections, while the local civil society organizations work alongside local communities and see the firsthand and the effect of the national and the local policies on the people. It is, in fact, actually the vulnerable communities who suffer the greatest impact from disasters. As for example, what we got the result from the consultations with thousands of communities from GNDR's views from the front line have found. So it is in the years following the initial crisis that the effects of the pandemic will be felt by these communities through reduction in services, loss of livelihoods, and reduced social protection. So we have with us here a very prominent personality, our very own longtime old friend, Terry Gibson, Dr. Terry Gibson. So it's been more than a decade that I've known Terry when I was a part of a VFL process in 2009. And I think many of us were also the part of the same process. So Terry has reached out to a number of members of civil society organizations and others who have worked with them to see they wish to share the experiences and insights from working locally during the COVID. So the aim was to gather concrete experiences of a range of contexts at the local level. So in this context, from Nepal, we have also shared our experiences of working at the local level during COVID-19. And NSET has also organized a number of webinars and consultative meetings with local government and other stakeholders to share and gather experiences regarding the COVID-19 at the local level, which we have shared during the process. I know many of you have also shared the context of your country, which I'm sure Terry will elaborate more in his presentations to follow. So basically, this webinar presents the findings, the draft findings and recommendations resulting from those consultations that have done with all of you. And we invite your contributions and insights to refining them, also recommendations for communicating them, and finally, actions that can be taken forward to build on this consultation. With this very brief introduction of the webinar, As Rita already mentioned, the webinar will be an hour and a half. This interactive, it will be a very interactive session. I guess it will be. There are many people who wanted to speak and share their insights. So first, we'll be having presentation on the findings and headlines of the report by Terry. This presentation will be followed by opportunities to share specific perspectives. Some of you who have participated already have insights to share, and others may wish to do so. So we have allocated 20-25 minutes for that. So with this, I also would like to request that, which Terry will be further elaborating on his, that we have not more than 3 minutes for each participant. So I know there will be a lots of sharing, but considering the time, I request you to please limit it to the allocated time. And at the end, with all the outcomes of the discussion and the next steps, the webinar will be concluded by Dr. Manu Gupta, ex-co-member of ADRR and co-founder of Seeds India. So with this brief introduction, without further ado, I would like to hand over this floor to Dr. Terry Gibson to share his findings and the result of the consultations. Over to you, Terry. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nisha. Can I just check that you can hear me okay? Yeah, good. And let me see if I can share my PowerPoint with you. Okay. So as Nisha said, the purpose of this webinar is to expand some work that we've been doing over the last couple of months. So I'll just very briefly add to Nisha's introduction on who I am. I spent a long time as someone specialising in communications and filmmaking, travelling in different countries on behalf of aid agencies. The side effect of that was that I met a huge number of people, often from small civil society organisations, and I learned a lot about the challenges faced by organisations trying to communicate the needs of local communities and often struggling to do so. That led me on into working with the Global Network for Disaster Reduction, which I joined the secretariat of just after it started its work. And I led the Views from the Frontline project, which had the aim of gathering knowledge and experience from local level and using it to influence local government, national government and international agencies. And I've carried on in that work through writing and research. So as Nisha said, we've faced one of the greatest disasters as a world that we've encountered in recent times, and my concern, being particularly focused on the role of civil society organisations and the effect of disasters on communities, was what was going to come next. We've faced and we are still facing a huge health emergency, but we see that emergency continuing in terms of the economic impact on lives and livelihoods of people. So I reached out to a number of people who I've worked with previously, working at local level, and that's where we got to today. We started off by asking a question. The question was, what part might civil society organisations working closely with local communities play in the long-term response to and recovery from COVID? And there were 2 or 3 things in our mind. One was...
Dr. Terry?
Yeah?
Sorry to disturb you. Is it possible to make it presentation mode?
Right.
At the down.
Yeah, okay. Okay, is that better?
Yeah, yes.
Okay, are you seeing the right screen clearly now?
Yes, please go ahead.
That's great. Thank you for advising me on that. I'm not brilliant on this technology, so if I'm getting anything wrong, then please wave a hand or tell me. So here's the question that we set ourselves, and we thought about whether civil society organisations had a particular role, for example, as bridge builders. We thought about the extent to which they can act as a channel for linking resources to local needs and priorities. And we also wondered whether in some cases they have a watchdog or an advocacy function, but these were just some of our starting questions. So what we did was, over a period of time, we gathered together. The method we adopted was participative. It was involved in people contributing their local level experiences. From the people I reached out to, about 18 people connected to different organisations collaborated on this consultation. And we started off by circulating those questions, and then people fed back their thoughts and comments. We gathered that material together, circulated it back out, and we went through about 8 cycles of this consultation over a 2-month period. And at the end of that period, or during that period, we gradually grew what I'd call a living document, which developed a summary of findings and calls for action. Which I'm presenting just some of the headlines from today. And let me mention that we have a web page. I've put it in the chat already, so if you scroll up the chat, you'll find a web link that gives you access to this PowerPoint presentation and to the draft report that we've been developing to date. So let's move straight to the findings. I've got 2 slides here which give us the headlines from what we saw as the findings. First of all, we talked about the fact that there are disasters within the disaster. In some cases, the consequences of the disaster and the responses to it have actually caused further disasters of various types. For example, in Togo, there have been instances of police brutality in policing lockdowns and so on. People have even been killed. One community member said the police were even more violent than the pandemic. That's a particular case. There's also been, in many cases, a trade-off between health and economics. That's something that probably many of you will recognise as a political issue. For example, in Nepal, it seems that there's been a focus on health, obviously, and on food supplies, but the impact of the pandemic on livelihoods, the economic pressures that result, have not been so far so much addressed. Bangladesh is another example where the garment industry is a kind of motor of the country's economy, so there's huge resistance to in any way closing down the factories, even though they're potential hotbeds of infection. So tension between health and economics. In terms of local capacities, sometimes these local capacities have been recognised in a new way. For example, in Kenya, it seems that international agencies have had to scale down their efforts, or they've been restricted in terms of movement, and the government's had to turn to local communities as a channel for support to the local areas. Similarly, from Indonesia, an example of restrictions on an agency working there, delivering its projects in its normal mode, and having to therefore hand over more control of the project to local communities, and actually seeing positive benefits of that happening. So 3 more findings here. Firstly, talking about partnerships and communication. An organisation in Cambodia highlighted the value and the power of strengthening partnerships and working collaboratively. A very different story in Cameroon was of the way that the pandemic drove or encouraged the government to rebuild fractured relationships with communities which had resulted from earlier conflict. funding cuts. All of this reflects CSOs doing more work, and yet many CSOs report that funding has become increasingly difficult. At country level, I know in my own country, the UK, there have been moves to restrict international funding. INGOs are experiencing reductions in their income, funds are closing down, funds are being restricted. And so we have the paradox that as civil society organisations are being asked to do more and more, they have less and less resources in order to deliver those requirements. And finally, in terms of findings, a lack of DRR, disaster risk reduction thinking. As I mentioned, my work, particularly with GNDR, has been in terms of disaster risk reduction, and many of the people here today will have involvements in that area as well as others. And what CSOs see is that there needs to be a longer term response, and that response needs to involve reducing exposure to risk and building sustainability, whereas quite often governments tend to focus in the short term. They invoke emergency legislation, they act at a large scale in terms of response, they draw in other agencies in terms of response, but there's a relative lack of disaster risk reduction thinking about how in the longer term can we reduce the impact of threats on communities. One example from the Philippines, where I know from years past there have been progressive movements in DRR legislation, and for instance there were local budgets for DRR, but in the last year or two new legislation that's being pushed through moves the government back to a response mode. And at the same time, the government has been invoking anti-terrorist legislation in order to restrict freedoms, for instance, red tagging organisations, even such as Oxfam and one of the universities. So in the light of those findings, what did we come up with as our suggested recommendations, or what we called calls to action? Because what are the practical things that could be done? Well, first of all, quite obviously, resources are a challenge. And in many cases, CSOs talk about the particular challenge of funding being projectized. So the funding is tied to particular deliverables, often short term, sometimes at worst becoming a box ticking exercise. Whereas in the light of what we've said in our findings, what's needed is sustained effort to build sustainable communities, to strengthen livelihoods, to address matters of disaster risk reduction, climate change adaptation, and so on. And that means new funding models which can be accessed by local CSOs to support core costs. And that's a message that we need to communicate to donors. We need to communicate it through the communications channels that we have, such as networks and platforms. Similarly, with policies, government, as we've mentioned in our findings, tend to focus on the short term, and CSOs are in it for the long term. They're well connected to local knowledge and experience, and their voices need to be heard more strongly in shaping overall policies so that they lead to effective implementation. So again, there's a need here for CSOs to unite through networks and platforms, locally, regionally, internationally, to press for a stronger voice for the priorities of communities in building long-term sustainability. Two more calls to action here. Building partnerships. We've mentioned partnerships, and CSOs are often connected to many different agencies at the local level and further afield, both directly and through the networks they're part of. So we believe that in order to strengthen sustainable approaches, we need to encourage the building of more effective partnerships and giving CSOs a better voice in those partnerships, calling on entities such as UN agencies to recognise that. Finally, and this is kind of quite a long sort of title, Advocate for Transformational Disaster Risk Reduction. Well, a long title, what does it mean? We've talked about disaster risk reduction, and people often talk about the need for transformation. That is to say that rather than just trying to return to something like what existed previously, we need to transform situations. Disasters at best can create opportunities for change. They cause disruption of the normal modes of action. And we feel that a lot of what's been said in our findings leads to the need to call for a shift from short-term magic bullets. And again, one of our partners mentioned the magic bullet of vaccines. So governments gravitate towards a short-term solution. They are, hopefully, we've fixed it. And vaccines are incredible things. They make a huge impact. But that's the short-term fix. What about the long-term? Someone else mentioned to a need to shift from response to social protection, and that being a trend in development thinking. An organisation in Pakistan conducted a survey that suggested that for the poor, it's going to take at least 4 years to recover from the economic impacts of the present disaster. So again, we need to think long term in terms of addressing disaster risk reduction, climate change adaptation, sustainable development, in terms of calling for transformation in the way that policies are constructed and implemented. So what? I've asked these recommendations. It's very easy to say this should happen, that should happen, the other should happen, but the challenge is what can we do to help stimulate some of these changes. There, what next are the recommendations that I've mentioned: resources, policies, building partnerships, transformational disaster risk reduction. And these are the ideas we've come up with. What other recommendations might there be from this discussion, from other work we might do? And what in practice can we do? How can we make those recommendations heard? Well, again, we don't have all the answers. Maybe we can develop publications which we can disseminate ourselves, which others can use. News releases, blogs, documents, even academic papers, reports. Different audiences need different kinds of communication. And that's something that we can do by taking the material that we've gathered and shaping it into effective communication. Maybe there's more work to be done. I don't know. Maybe we can broaden this group, strengthen its recommendations, add weight to it. Maybe practical fundraising needs to be considered. Maybe there need to be new channels of funding which do support core funding for local CSOs, the kind of online models of organisations like Global Giving. Again, there may be other ideas. So that's the presentation. And let me stop that screen share now. So I'll just show you one more screen. I've mentioned in the chat already, so if you scroll back through the chat, you can find this link to the web page. That's the home for this material. So if you want to access this slide presentation or the draft report we produced, or if you'd like to contribute either on the comments box on that page or in a dedicated multi-language forum, the link to that is there, and you'll find that on the web page as well. So those are the ways that you can access this material and also contribute. Okay, so let's move from that to discussion. I'm just going to take a moment. I'm going to stop that share now. And I'm just going to check the chat. And move to discussion. So we've got several people who've already said they'd like to contribute. These are members of the group who developed this material, and I'm going to be calling on them in turn to make short contributions. As Nisha said, we need to restrict those to a maximum of 3 minutes each. And if you would like to add a contribution of your own, then I'll try and keep an eye on the participants panel. If you raise your hand, then I'll try and involve you as well. So you can see the raise hand option at the bottom of the screen. But first of all, I'm going to turn to Guillaume. Guillaume, are you ready to speak to us? Hi, Guillaume. So Guillaume's been part of this group. You'll need to unmute.
Yes,
Yeah.
I'm ready.
Okay, so Guillaume from Vietnam has a contribution to make. Thank you, Guillaume.
Yes, so Vietnam is quite a special country for many reasons. Until now, 2,500 cases of COVID in a country of 95 million people, 35 dead only. So, and we are at the border of China also. So how the Vietnam could be successful? Vietnam have experience of epidemic before. They have experience of resistance against many disasters, natural disaster or man-made disaster. And there is a common collective perception of life is quite important, more important than the roof of a house or a factory. So when the government, the state decides some quite strict measure, all people agree to follow this recommendation. Either like everywhere, either mask, social distancing, not to gather too much people. And what is quite different from other countries is here the state has the capacity to control every part of the country, every city, every neighbor, and nearly every house. So they can control everything. They take measure. People agree on this measure, and they control very strictly. And for example, all people who return to Vietnam since 1 year have to spend 2 weeks in a quarantine. Even there is a vaccine now. So it's very successful for health. For economies, like in many countries, there is no tourists, even no national tourists, because people are still afraid. There is no, actually 2 or 3 cases by day in the country, but people are not willing to travel, to go for holidays, because they are incredibly afraid, because the virus is invisible. Everybody here knows storm, flooding. They used to be in this. They are not so afraid, but COVID, they are afraid. They respect the measure. Until now, we continue to wear masks outside. If we go to a public place, somebody check your temperature. And there is no case. In the city where I live, there have been no case since 1 year, so never, okay. So the civil society play an important role because they agree on this measure. They really agree. So it's difficult to say it's restrained some freedom, because there is no freedom before. So it's going to continue.
Guillaume, I need to ask you to get to your conclusion now. Sorry, you're out of time. Yeah.
So I think when COVID is finished, the situation, the life will continue like before. with the event in Myanmar, in China, Vietnam hopes to attract more investors, foreign investors. And for the basic civil rights, there will be no change because the state will continue to assume the political control of all the society. So that's where we are. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Guillaume. It's a very interesting context there for the reasons that Guillaume said. Contrasting with that, I know from contributions that Adesu has made that there have been very different challenges in both Togo and Senegal, the two countries where he operates. Adesu, are you ready to speak to us about your comments?
Yeah, thanks, Terry, for the opportunity, and thanks for the presentation. I will not focus my intervention on the comment because they are already in the document, but I just want to reflect a bit on the role of the civil society in this context. So I've noted 4 points that I will present very quickly. I will not comment on them. I will just present them and we will reflect on them together. So for me, the first point consists to continue the sensitization to reduce the vulnerability of people to COVID. I think we think we are winning the war of COVID in terms of virus, but the impacts are still there and are going to be there for a long time. So it's important for civil society organizations to continue to be close to communities, especially the most vulnerable communities, and continue to provide them guidance, information, and also reflect with them to prepare them better to tackle with the consequences. That's the first role of the civil society that I'm saying. The second point is about a soft contingency plan. So this will help us to build back better, but in a positive and transformative way. I think we need this contingency plan should be a continuous work to help a community to see better what the future may look like for them and to plan it themselves rather than waiting for external people to support them. And I think the civil society has a great job to play on that role. The third point, and believe me, I'm trying to be in the 3 minutes, is to provide support to the most in need and come with concrete evidence to motivate fund and donation from donors. As we say, funds are limited, and for us to continue to mobilize this fund to support communities, it's important to bring evidence and at the same time to provide support to the most in need, because there are really people in need who cannot survive without external support, because we are talking about disaster exactly. So I think it's also important for civil society to keep its eyes open in that area. And lastly, but not the least, I think civil society should show solidarity among themselves, while the weakest should be supported by the strongest, because we know we have 2 types of civil society organization. Those who are very close to communities are generally weak, but they have the will and the knowledge to support. So how the strongest, I mean, those who are financially, economically much more organized, can support this small organization so that the system, the whole line is taken to, is secure for the most vulnerable and at the same time for civil society organization. So these are the 4 points I think I can share with the participant here. And maybe we can reflect on deeper. Thank you so much. I think my 3 minutes are consumed now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adesu, for those contributions, focusing on the role of civil society, on how they're supported, and that interesting point that you made, that there ought to be a solidarity between more substantial civil society organisations and the smaller organisations closer, if you like, to the front line. While we're over in West Africa, Andy Kings, I can see you're there. Andy, are you ready to make your contribution?
Yeah. Hi Terry.
Hi, Andy. Good to hear from you. Yeah.
Yeah, quite a long time. Yes, nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity. And good morning to everybody. Adesu, good morning.
Good morning.
Yeah, I think first of all, thanks for this initiative that we started from a couple of months ago, and it's really a great opportunity for us to, contribute our own aspects of what has really been going on, the impact of what COVID has really brought and have changed our world for the past 1 year. Well, I have my time is limited, just 3 minutes. I just want to share a few points. I think in really dealing with the issue of COVID and its impact, first of all, I will suggest that there should be a better collaboration between CSOs, government, and the community themselves, because in times of crisis like this, Synergy, we do a lot of work to really bring solutions, to really bring results to the community that is impacted. So a stronger collaboration between government, CSOs, and the communities have to really be on board. And secondly, we should also look at data gathering. We are working in GNDR. We are working in working with communities to gather that data, because now we are going to be involving another aspect of vulnerability among communities. So there should be a gathering of data on what exactly and to which level is COVID really impacting communities. There should be enough data now that should be gathered to be able to help actors and donors to be able to know exactly where and which areas and which communities are more impacted than others. And then we should look at now the fact that COVID-19 is now a major threat. It's now a major threat. We work with frontline communities, especially with the job that we are doing here in Senegal. We're working with frontline communities, and what we get, the feedback we get now from communities when it comes to vulnerability is just COVID. COVID has become like the major threat that now communities now face. Apart from just the virus itself, the economic impact of what has happened, the lockdowns and the shutdowns, the impact that has brought to community has made it a major subject among communities. If you go to communities now and ask what their vulnerability is, the first thing they will tell you is just the impact of COVID. And that should be taken into account in any interventions that we are planning going forward. And then that will take me to the final point, which is like the economic impact already being felt. Businesses are shut down, even in urban areas like in Dakar where we were. I'm sure that you've heard in the news for the past 2 weeks, Dakar has been boiling. People are just trying to look for opportunity to express their frustration, economic frustrations. And most of these economic frustrations are linked to the problems that the lockdowns and the COVID issues have brought over the past 1 year. So the youths are restive. People don't have any other way to express themselves. And when opportunity came for political engagement between leaders, unemployed youth just took advantage of that. Yeah. And government should begin to do something to reduce the economic impact of COVID among communities.
Okay, thank you
very much.
Thank you very much, Andy. I'm not going to try and process these comments at the moment, and what I want to do straight away is to feed in case you haven't seen them, some comments that have come in on the chat. One from Ebe in Mauritania, asking how to present a project to mitigate the impact of COVID-19. I'm inviting others of you to respond to that question, and I'll be in touch afterwards. Ahmad, good to hear from you in Nepal, is making a point about the absolute focus, as Andy has said, on COVID, but saying in particular, this has diverted attention from the many other health needs of the population. And he's given a particular example there. And has our research considered the impact of such a lack of medical support? No, it hasn't, but we'd be grateful for more thinking on that. Certainly that's a live discourse in my own country. And then Caesar from Kenya, talking about the need for addressing accountability, particularly to do with state-controlled funding, where a lot of wastage and corruption is being reported to the media, and that leads to a need for advocacy from CSOs in terms of accountability. And I've just noticed that Sanu, who I was just about to speak, has mentioned that he's got to go soon. So good timing, Sanu. Are you able to speak to us? This is Sanu from Cambodia. Hiya.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes, you can. Thanks.
Okay, good. Thank you. Yeah, thank you for this excellent initiative. And also special thanks that you could bring all of our so close friends that we normally don't meet, but there was a time we had interaction almost every day. So thanks for this. So coming to the point, the 3 key points from your side that are the national and local CSOs have uniquely positioned to build collaboration with the government. You know, different country, different perspectives. I'm talking from Cambodian perspectives. At the beginning, Cambodian government, they had a call for volunteers and who is interested to work in this field, but maintaining the instruction of the health. So there are some civil societies, they are working. There are civil societies, they are not. And then, so the doors of the government to work with the, on this particular pandemic is not closed, it is open. So we have this opportunity to work. And then the role, particular this pandemic, the role, what we can play in the flood or drought, and the role here is fully different because we don't see our enemy, the virus. So the techniques and tactics of playing effective role in addressing this pandemic is limited because we are not enough equipped, as we are not the doctors, as we are not the health workers. So there is a limited scope of engagement, but there is good scope of engagement, creating awareness and advocacy, helping people to follow the instruction of the health ministry. The key point on the watchdog and advocacy. So again, it depends on which country, which perspectives. So if the watchdog or if there is anything in a complementing approach, that works. That is my experience. If the watchdog is going to do fault finding approach, it does not work because the government, in my experience, many countries, the government don't like the civil societies because they go for conflicting. And when the civil societies have good capacity and they want to complement, think positively, do positively, that works. It is not only our Southeast Asia or South Asia, it is almost everywhere in the world. Of course, there are differences because of political perspectives, because of economic perspectives, there are differences. It is not a mathematical format. But my experience is, if we do the job as a watchdog to complement, to find opportunity to help, to contribute, then that is a good approach. Similarly, the advocacy, it has 2 ways. One is putting the government to be accountable for. And then there is a problem. When you work you may have some limitation. And if we do the advocacy to identify what are the needs and gaps and empower the people to carry out the job, and then directly complement in the efforts of the government and efforts of the other institutions. So that advocacy works. So we have to see under what condition and under what approach we want to work. It depends on country to country political perspectives and this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sano. Yeah, I think we've picked up from several directions the idea that wherever it's possible to build relationships collaboratively and constructively, that's really valuable. Sometimes that's not possible. Sometimes there are challenges. We've had a message in the Q&A from Frederick in Philippines saying yes in response to Caesar in Kenya. There's a need for accountability. So sometimes accountability gets lost and it becomes difficult to be anything other than challenging. And Rabia from Pakistan, who was going to be here, I know if she'd been here would say that there's similar challenges in Pakistan, whereas Guillaume said, you know, one benefit of the nature of the state society relationships in Vietnam is that there is at best a lot of collaboration there. So different strategies in different contexts. We're getting short on time. We've got 2/3 contributors because Pradeep from India has said he wants to speak, and then finally Lorna and Mayforth together from Philippines have got a contribution, and then we'll turn to Manu to wrap up if that's okay. So Pradeep, are you ready to make your contribution?
Thank you, Terry. And it's a good congregation. All old friends are there. Manu is here, Sanu is here, Surya is here, and of course you are here. And we met also, Nisha. And thank you. And it's good. We should recall our even if past relationship, how to be bring our again solidarity to work together, better resilience. But I can give you this few examples of Odisha. As Manu also can also add it. It's if it is anything gap, and it's civil society is the part of the even if it's all kind of disasters in Odisha, even if India, and it's during, before, during, and after. It's all kind of starting from rescue, response, and rehabilitation is the part of job of the civil society. However, it's only because of this collective action, collective thought, collective initiatives. There are so many innovations it has been brought, and it's even if it's shelter sector, it's Manu can add it, and even if water sector, Manu and others can also add it. And it's a great force that has been working together during any kind of disaster strikes, because Odisha is part of this disaster, is a hub of the disaster. What it comes in and what is goes, it's returns back. It hits Odisha because it is the coast of the Bay of the Bengal. So that it's more disasters may strike later on because of this climate change. So now that we can say it is nothing is natural and everything is human made. And if it is human made, that is what are the precautions we should take it forward as a civil society, and how to create a very good pressure to the government. And this is one. Second thing is, if you pressure the government, this is what type of pressure we should put it on the government. That is another thing. But it is there has certain strictures. Government has restricted all kinds of action, and it's advocacy rights, not to undertake in its Indian context. If you go for this right based anything, you will be under this scanner. This is one. Second thing, that is government is asking, government is requesting for the consultation, but it is never they allow for the implementation. And if there is a possibilities of grant or possibilities of support and possibility of pulling resources from outside, there are so many restrictions that the government, civil society is hardly to scale this program if it is even if innovations. This is second thing. Post management of the disaster, I think it is in Orissa. Orissa is one of the champions in anything it is managing the disaster, and it is so many pathways to government, international governments, intergovernmental bodies, UN bodies, how to make the community resilience on the ground. But post management post management of this disaster, it's very hectic. I think this is, I cannot accuse anybody, but it's in that case we are very lagging behind.
Pradeep, they're very interesting insights from Odisha. You need to wrap up now, please, so we've got time for our last contributor.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. That we can contribute later on. But if you ask, then we can join together. What are the possibilities? How to bring togetherness and make communities more sustainable and secure. I think that we should learn from others also. It is not only that we know everything, and others are. Surya also, he is having very good knowledge. Sano also their knowledge, and Sano is leading our Jeff collectives. So we'll be happy to be part of it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Pradeep. And I think, the underlying message of solidarity, both at local level and in what we're doing here, learning from each other and also providing a sense of support to each other is a very important message. So thank you, Pradeep.
Indian CSOs, they have already expressed their solidarity wherever in the world. There is any disaster, they have expressed their solidarity on ground and with shoulder to shoulder, they have worked together, and we will continue to that. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm going to turn finally to Lorna and Mayforth, who've got a contribution from the Philippines.
Hey, afternoon. I think good morning in some parts. So from the Philippines, we have a long history of very active and empowered civil society organizations. But in COVID-19, the approach of the government was really very top-down. We had different structures and still have different structures for disaster risk reduction and management. But we had an interagency task force for COVID-19 response, which made all the decisions and all the policies without much consultation. So civil society organizations, particularly those engaged in disaster risk reduction and management, provided services. So the services started with providing for food security. So you talk of the supply chain as something very technical, but from farmers, fisher folk, having those from the rural areas now go into urban areas. That was a strategy. And then calling on local governments to include in their relief packs all this fresh produce coming from the farmers, the fisher folk, so that their income and produce would not go to waste, because there were also many cases of those perishables which were dumped just on the road. It's good if somebody picked it up, as culture also in some communities, but it was also a waste if it was just going to spoil. And then we did not just have COVID, we also had a string of disasters during COVID. So that was also a challenge to respond also to the devastation and disruption caused by typhoons and flooding. But also COVID, CSOs also provided services where there are gaps, like psychosocial support. CDP started with that, mental health and psychosocial support services, and this continued. In the picture below, in some areas, they can do it already face-to-face but in many instances, you still use online or webinars for it. But the strength of CSOs, I think, is in the situation of top-down is also advocacy. Advocacy for what we call now a better normal. So consultations are starting for that. But also within COVID, the CSOs in the DRM community also work for the government had this terrorism law, so anti-terrorism law. So even DRM actors were active also in bringing to the attention of the public and of our Supreme Court the sections of this law which were anti-constitutional and also not for the interest of the people. So I'll call on May 4th because I'm already advisor at the Center for Disaster Preparedness, who is more operational in all this. May 4th, can you also apprise us of other developments?
Okay, let me just say that unfortunately we're very tight on time now, so I'm afraid you've only got about a minute or so left. Thanks, May 4th.
Thank you, no problem. I think Ms. Lorna has already summed up of much of what we have done. But probably I would just add on one interesting role of CSOs in the country is the role of giving feedback and making the government accountable and the duty bearers accountable of what they are doing. So we've been involved, our major networks, the National Anti-Poverty Commission, as well as the DRR Net and all other big networks. We even have like inter-network formed because of this COVID. The Philippines are very good in networking and making networks. But the thing is, the good role is to making the duty bearers accountable. So we had this feedback mechanism from the communities, and then we give it back to the national government, and it helped in improving the response. So that's one. Another is, of course, while doing national advocacies and everything, each CSOs have their own local actions, which is very vital in filling in the gaps. Or sometimes they do not fill the gaps. They are the ones who spearheaded the response in different ways. So the range of help from the CSOs varies from what Ms. Lorna was saying, from livelihood, from food and non-food items, psychosocial support, support for the frontliners, and all of this information campaign. So all this we did in the Philippines, and as I've also heard from the other countries, they have similar things that they do in their areas. Thank you very much.
So going forward, and I thought that would be something that I would want to really share with all of you. What do we do together? What is it that we can bring on the table that we can then sort of share and reinforce and yet inform our own actions? And I thought four things that we must really focus on. One is, we got this this very unique opportunity to build a case for local action, locally led action, right? Whether it was the collapse of the supply chains or the nature of governance in many countries, we really, the international organizations had to really depend on the local organizations, on local leadership, on local community-based organizations. And I think we have a strong narrative to build around that. So my suggestion to all my dear friends here is that let's build that localization. Let's not lose this chance. The second was, and this is something that ADRN is really working on, is how do we really build a case for anticipatory action? I think this is something that is now going to be increasingly an area which intersects with public health emergencies and climate change and disasters, humanitarian context. So something on anticipatory action and what that constitutes, I don't know yet. Maybe we should develop that narrative. And I heard words from Andy like data, the importance of data and evidence on types of partnerships that we can look at for this area of action. The third one is around new partnerships and new ways, creative ways, if I can borrow that word from Sano, about how do we really build that solidarity and collaboration where each person of the partnership, each individual entity of that partnership sees the value and respects the value of the other. You know, it's not like a contractee kind of arrangement, or a grant or a grantee kind of arrangement where I give you the money and I decide what I need to do, but actually looking at creatively what are the comparative advantages each partner gets on this. And I think this pandemic has really shown us that. And finally, I think the scale of the problem, we civil society organizations enjoyed things at a small scale with the community, you know, and we like to do that boutique approaches. But I think that time is no longer, I mean, I think that luxury is no longer there. You know, the climate emergency, like what Lorna, you said about double disasters, having, you know, hurricanes and typhoons while we had that pandemic, the climate urgency. I think this, if we really want to live up to the expectations of the communities we serve, we also need to scale up and look at ways of scaling our work. Yeah, so this is what came out strongly, and I thought this could be some ways of forward. Back to you, Rita ji. Thank you very much all for this great discussion today. Rita ji, back to you.
Thank you, Manu sir, for summarizing so well. Now we are at the end of today's program. I would like to thank you everyone on behalf of organizing team, EDR again, and Terry, Dr. Terry, and all other contributors for your active participation, sharing your views, and contributing to make this discussion lively. We look forward to meet again on similar platform in future. And I would like to say goodbye for today. Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Namaste.
you. Bye-bye. Namaste.
Thank you.